Let me speak with your manager. When you hear those words, whether you're next in line or behind the counter just trying to make this person sandwich whether I have a shirt on or not, you know there's a problem, and you know that it's escalated. If you check your org chart, you'd know that the buck passes a bunch of employees on its way to stop at the top. The manager, the boss, the person with their name on the door has to answer for it all. But in reality, the people at the top don't have much control. A typical manager is managing people, their individual workflows, temperaments, and varying degrees of effort and output. Without a holistic approach to management, one that connects the workflows to a larger system, the opportunities to improve and grow your business are dying in a pointless meeting about snack theft in the break room. According to a recent survey from the American Bar Association, 64% of lawyers don't use case management software. Well, what do they use? Duct tape? What if there was a way to really manage a law firm? Take control and not just cope. That's what we're talking about today on Lawsome. Managing the modern law firm. Time to clock in.
Lawsome, the podcast for law firms. Powered by Consultwebs.
Welcome back to Lawsome, the only vitamin-fortified podcast for law firms that now features 50% more vitamin H. We're here to inform, educate, and entertain the legal community on the latest in personal and professional development. I'm Jake Sanders, your provost co-host, and joining me today is Deacon Paul Julius. Paul, I hope this podcast finds you well.
It does. Just focused on spreading the good word to all our listeners.
Yes, as you should, a man of the cloth, the digital cloth.
That's right. I'm a digital evangelist.
I forgot. That's your new job title here. And I'm the Minister of Clickable Affairs.
That's right. We're on a mission.
Before we get to the mission, what's on the show today?
On the show today, we hit the hot takes buffet with an article from AmericanBar.org about managing a law firm. Interview legal tech evangelist and super blogger Nicole Black from MyCase.com. And we take Nicole to central booking with 10 questions we ask everyone.
Pull up a plate. It's the hot takes buffet.
The link today is from AmericanBar.org. It's from 2013. It's called Future-Proofing Your Law Firm. I came across it, and I thought it would be interesting to see advice from 5 years ago on how lawyers should future-proof themselves and see if it held up. And I'm super happy because Jim Calloway, who's the guy who wrote this, I think nailed it here. Nothing is too out of control. What was your take on this?
So first of all, I thought it was amazing that we're looking at this article 5 years down the road, and there's this quote in it from Yogi Berra. It says, if you don't know where you're going, you might wind up someplace else.
Right.
But the information in here, I think, still holds pretty true.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of good things in here. One of the ones I like a lot, it says, ignore technology advances at your peril. Fixed fees is something that we actually talked to Nikki about a little bit later.
Right.
You know, I don't know, man. I think there's a lot of good stuff here. What do you think?
I think there's kind of a confluence of legal tech, and we also talk about this later, and entrepreneurship. You kind of mentioned it when you went to the ABA legal tech conference in Chicago. You briefly stopped by there, and it has this startup feel. It has this kind of new, it's like the angel rounds of investments. And a lot of people are kind of bubbling. I think what me and you and this author are kind of saying are the things that are consistent won't change with the new. That's what I would hope people are focusing on. He has 8 tips on here. The 7th tip is growth cannot be infinite. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs are thinking, well, growth is dominant. I need to be growing. We have to be growing. And I think one of the more interesting parts is when he's saying future-proof your law firm, he's not saying protect it from the future. He's saying make sure it's around in the future. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's not about hiding from robots. It's about doing work. So when the robots show up, because they're coming, you know, you have strategies and stuff. He says your best marketing tool remains what it's always been. Do great work for clients and build a reputation that causes others to refer your legal work. Word of mouth is not going anywhere. Good marketing principles, having a good approach to running a good business, that's not going anywhere. Managing your affairs. He also has Yogi Berra. He has really good quotes in this. He has one from Peter Drucker. Efficiency is doing the thing right. Effectiveness is doing the right thing. So he's talking about, it's not about how quick it's done. It's about how well it's done and how much value you bring. So I think he could have written this yesterday and it still would be revolutionary, because I think there's a lot of hot takes and most people are only taking what works for them and then kind of shirking the rest. But this was in the ABA and it's got these kind of tips, timeless. I'm excited about it. I think it's a good article.
I think it's interesting too that it's kind of an example of itself. Like, here's this guy's, you know, when you're talking about future proof, I mean, this article is somewhat future proof.
Well, evergreen,
You know, it's basically said, I mean, I love the one that just says pay attention. You know, it doesn't necessarily, he doesn't say take action. He just says pay attention. And I think that's important. I think there's, you know, is everybody going to jump into something where, you know, everybody in their office is wearing, you know, VR headsets and stuff? Not today and probably not tomorrow. But I mean, you know, are there considerations now that, I mean, are just second nature? Like, are you using some kind of invoicing system? Surely you're not still doing this in a ledger. I mean, maybe you are. I don't know. But I think, you know, there's a lot of these things where people, you know, you may not notice it, but sometimes change is slower. But it's this accepted thing where other industries maybe kind of push along these things that need to be done in order for, you know, billing to happen. You know, everybody uses Square or some kind of credit card payment processing system.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So that's just part of it, you know?
That's why in the interview with Nikki, we get into kind of the nitty gritty aspects of practice management and how tech can help solo and small firms and large firms kind of address the tech that's coming at us. But this was a good read, and you should stick around for the interview.
Let's get into the nitty gritty.
Let's go.
And now, a word from our sponsor.
I met Tanner, who works for Consultwebs, on a plane on the way back from Key West, Florida. And I'd just been thinking that I needed to do some more marketing for my law firm. So when he told me that he worked for Consultwebs, I was super excited. From the beginning till even now, I've been with them for almost 2 years, and the experience has really been great. Having Consultwebs on board is really like having your own team of people that really care about what kind of business you're getting. I mean, practicing law can seem kind of lonely. You always are wondering, how am I going to get clients? How am I going to make payroll? But with Consultwebs, it's not just me worrying about having people come in the door. They're there as well. And they've been so responsive. Since I started with Consultwebs, I have increased the number of employees double at least. And since I started with Consultwebs, the revenue has tripled. So it's really been an incredible experience.
Go to consultwebs.com to learn more.
And now, for a lawsome interview.
Nicole Black got her JD from Albany Law School. She's been a public defender, had a private practice, was an associate, and is now the legal tech evangelist at mycase.com, a case management software company for lawyers. Stating that she exists where law and technology intersect, Nicole is a prolific author and blogger on the subject of legal tech and practice management. It was her strong Twitter game that brought her to the attention of this podcast, and we're honored to have Nicole Black on the Lawson Podcast today. How are you, Nicole?
I'm doing good, thanks. Thanks for having me here.
Excellent. So explain your journey from lawyer to legal tech evangelist.
In 2003, I was an associate with a litigation firm, and I've actually been interested in tech intermittently throughout my, when I was younger in my career. And I created a website for the firm, sort of on my own time for free. Then I had my first kid, and I decided it just wasn't quite where I wanted to be. I'd known for a while. So I took a hiatus from the law for about 2.5 years. And then I read an article in 2005 that women with professional degrees who take more than 3 years out, that seems to be the number in terms of their own perception of the getting back into the market and in terms of employers' perception. So I decided that I needed to do something at that point, and I decided to hang a shingle doing contract work for other lawyers, created a website, coded a website, and I was, set to go. And I had lunch with a cousin of mine who's a lawyer in town who's always been my mentor. And as he was walking away after lunch, and after I told him what I was going to be doing, he sort of looked over his shoulder and he said, I heard about this thing called blogging on NPR this morning. You might want to check that out. And this was in late 2005. And I looked up blogging and saw that, this was, and I'd always loved to write. So I figured I would start my first blog, Sui Generis, and I would write about things that would interest my potential market, other lawyers. So cases as they came down from the New York Court of Appeals. And initially I was just writing about that type of thing. But then I started to write about blogging and talk about blogging because it was becoming beneficial. I was meeting the other people that were blogging at the time. There weren't a lot of us in terms of lawyers out there. Mm-hmm. And I was getting to know lawyers in the legal tech space. And I went to 1 or 2 conferences and met them. And then I wrote about it for the Daily Record and for the local bar. And then I was asked to speak. And then the Daily Record asked me to write a regular column, which was not always, initially it wasn't about tech, but then social media started happening. And I started writing about that and speaking about that. And everything came from that blog and mm-hmm. the connections I'd made. Carolyn Elephant, who's my co-author on the Social Media for Lawyers book, reached out to me. I'd met her in person and said, I'm contracted to write this book about social media. You write about social media all the time. And I would like, do you want to co-author it with me? Because I'm sort of up against this deadline and I need some help. And so that's sort of where everything came from. And I started, and then I pitched the cloud computing book to my editor that I had at the ABA. Everything just kind of came from that initial blog, the connections I made, the opportunities to speak, opportunities to write elsewhere, book opportunities. And it also laid the groundwork for my getting hired by lawyers because it showed that I was current, that I could write well. One lawyer that I did work for was a local judge in town who asked me to co-author Criminal Law in New York eventually, which is a book she already had co-authored. And I just came on as a co-author. That's a Thomson Reuters treatise. And so it just, a lot of things came from the blogging and then my subsequent writing. And I just have always been focused on the intersection of law and tech ever since because it really fascinates me. And I like to see where things are going and kind of predict how it's going to affect the practice of law.
Yeah. Well, and you phrase it so wonderfully. You're such a great writer and you can tell because you've been doing it for consistently for 13 years.
Yeah.
Wow. But to get that pace and, you have a great way of just transmitting that. And Carolyn is Elephant. She's amazing on Twitter too. So, yeah. So that's no shock that you guys are together. But in specific to My Case, tell us about mycase.com. How does it work? And where did your partnership with them come from?
Well, so in 2012, my cloud computing book was published by the ABA. And I was asked to speak at Legal Tech in New York, which is a conference I always have attended, but that was the first year I'd been asked to speak. And so I went to Legal Tech, and whenever I go to those different conferences like that, whether I'm speaking or not, I go to a few each year just as press. And so since I was speaking, I got a press pass as well, and I cover other legal tech companies in the space. And the founders of My Case reached out to me along with a bunch of other people when they knew I was coming, and I had coffee with them. About a week later, they and I'd just written my book about cloud computing, and I'd covered the other practice management programs, but My Case had come along 2 years after Clio and Rocket Matter. And at the time they were newer. And so they convinced me to do a screen share to sort of do a demo a week down the road after Legal Tech. And during that conversation, they offered to hire me to continue to do what I do, but with My Case. And so and then 6 months after that, My Case was acquired. And then in 2015, Appfolio, the company that acquired My Case, had its IPO, which was pretty cool because I was one of the employees that got to go to New York City for that. Cool. So I was at NASDAQ for the IPO, which is not something I ever thought would be, in law school. I never even knew what an IPO was, quite frankly. I was never did business law. So it was never something I'd envisioned. But so what My Case does is it's practice management for solo and small firm attorneys, and it helps lawyers streamline their practices, reduce the, administrative tasks, helps them get paid more quickly, streamline their billing process, and really just streamline the whole back end of their practice. And it's targeted towards solo and smalls. And I advise internally on product and marketing, and then externally, I do a lot of speaking and writing about the intersection of law and technology.
So I'm completely fascinated by this because I know that we kind of share the same kind of statistics through Twitter, and I was seeing that there's a shocking dearth of people using legal tech software. Solos and smalls, they're going it alone in some kind of way. So I found an ABA legal tech survey. I think it was from 2015. What are the barriers you see facing lawyers when it comes to managing their practice? It's not all tech. Like, why aren't people? If tech is the answer, why aren't people all on board with this stuff? Like, what are the barriers that you've seen with lawyers?
Well, first of all, I'd suggest I get those surveys every year, and a lot's changed from 2015 to the most recent one in 2017. And part of what has changed dramatically is from 2012 to 2015, give or take, about 31 to 33% of lawyers would admit or understood that they use the cloud. And then in 2016, about and that number went up to about 38, and that was the first time it had increased in years. And then in 2017, the most recent survey, it went up to 47%. So 47% of lawyers understood that they were using the cloud and admitted or acknowledged that they used it, right? So that, I mean, a lot more are actually using the cloud than they had. And, the barriers, I think, have been just in terms of the cloud, security issues and ethics issues and concerns about whether data is going to be stored, and they're becoming increasingly comfortable with that concept. But in terms of tech generally, I think solo and smalls are actually they're the ones that lead the way because they're the most nimble and innovative and able to sort of incorporate this. Then you've got the large firms because they have these built-in IT staffs that will assist them in doing it, sometimes begrudgingly, depending on the kind of tech. And then the mid-sized firms are the least likely statistically and historically to use tech because of their setup. They either don't have anyone in-house or it's just one person and they outsource everything else and they're just slower to do it. But, the barriers are, no matter what size firm, lack of understanding. This is the way we've always done. It's still working. Sure. And, legacy systems, the larger you get, the more legacy systems and data, and there's pain points that need to be addressed in terms of how those legacy systems are working. But then there's pain points that would need to be addressed in terms of implementing new systems in place of the legacy systems. So, some people liken the larger and mid-sized firms to cargo ships, these really huge ships that can't turn on a dime. They
totally,
Mm-hmm. And so it just takes them a while to really be able to implement any kind of
they could
change.
do it. Yeah, it's just going to take them a while, right?
Right. Yeah.
Do you think there's also like a generational thing coming into it where there's maybe people who are more comfortable operating in the cloud and stuff like that are now having more of a say into how these firms' operations are run?
I mean, there's definitely some generational. There's the older, the boomers, generally speaking. And I know there's going to be boomers that that's not me out there, but generally
right.
speaking, especially the older boomers that are really close to retirement, this is just how they've always done it. They don't see any need to change. They're really just trying to make it to the finish line of retirement and keep their retirement funds intact without anything crashing before they do. So they're all very short-term focused. And then the Gen X's and the millennials, it just depends on how much power they actually have. Some firms will say, oh, let's let the young associate do it. And oftentimes, the law schools have been slow to prepare them as well. And tech is just slowly being incorporated into the law school curriculum. So oftentimes when it comes to social media, they understand how to use some aspects of that very well. On other platforms, they don't use it all. But when it comes to cloud computing and tech, a lot of them just haven't had the exposure. In some ways, law school can be like a black hole when it comes to tech, depending on the school you go to. So in some cases, they are the impetus behind it. And other times, they're just sort of dragging their feet just as much as anyone else. It really does depend.
Interesting. And you're not the first person to say that. And it's fascinating because, not always, let me put it this way. We've had lawyers tell us that, I'm in charge of the website because I'm the youngest guy here, or I got, and so it's not always the most qualified, and they're very forthcoming with that. Like, look, I don't really know this. It just seems weird to me. Like, here's something, like my case or something like that, where it's like, here it is. This is exactly what you need to get this done. But there still seems to be like the other side of this hill they're climbing of fax machines and, phone calls.
Totally.
Right. But they've got when I was practicing full time, and it's hard enough. And this was before tech was changing at this crazy clip. You're just trying to stay on top of your caseload, your clients' calls, changes in your practice areas. That in and of itself is hard enough. And I was a associate in a mid-sized firm. I didn't have to worry about any of the practice management stuff. I didn't have to worry about. Well, I had to worry about bringing in a book of business, but the marketing was more a firm issue. And when you have solo and smalls, they have to do all of that on top of just the regular maintenance of a law practice and a law degree and their expertise. So it can be overwhelming for them and tech has changed so quickly, so fast. And it can just be incredibly overwhelming for them to feel like it's hard for them to catch up. And so they just stick their heads in the sand. And I think it's oftentimes understandable. Maybe it's not reasonable, but it's understandable. But I do think it's changing. And I belong to the solo small section at our local bar. We just had a meeting today. My bar just started a technology committee, and I chair that. New York State Bar just started a technology committee, and the executive director of our local bar is on that committee. So, there's really a lot of organizations and that are trying to help lawyers learn this, and they really are interested. The questions that they have about tech in the solo small committee and their interest in it is, increasing. And I think it's because they know they have to learn this stuff. It's just a tough road for them. It's a lot of work.
So speaking of a tough road, and it's very encouraging to hear you bring up these different groups that are pushing these things forward, because we've heard it from other guests that a lot of times the barriers they run into are regulations. Are you seeing like the ABA or the New York Bar or any of these groups starting to say, hey, how can we facilitate this? Like, how can we help this work better than it has been?
The ethical opinions that have been coming down are oftentimes helpful. New York's always been sort of on the cutting edge and they've addressed these issues in their ethics opinions long before most other jurisdictions. And typically they've said lawyers can use cloud computing. They've said that lawyers can use Gmail with the ads being served up, and that's not doesn't violate attorney-client privilege, because it's a machine reading the emails just to serve up the ads, and then it's not used any further. And you could analogize that to Amazon Echo in a lot of ways. Whether people are using that to enter their calendar information or something. Now 41 states have incorporated the duty of technology competence, so that's helpful. Florida requires 2 technology CLE credits every 2 years. And they're the first ones to do that. And I know there's another state that's soon to follow that has proposed that, and it just has to be passed. So you're increasingly seeing the bar associations. And then the ABA issued Opinion 477 in May, which talked about how email is inherently insecure, and that on a case-by-case basis, lawyers need to consider how sensitive the information is in that particular case, and whether they need to use some other more secure form of electronic communication, like encrypted email or encrypted portals built into law practice management systems. So, one way to avoid that issue of a case-by-case review is just to, across the board, incorporate encrypted communications one way or another. So, the ethics opinions are all starting to fall in line and keep up with tech. It's just takes a while for them to, review everything and then issue the opinion. So
keeping it current, like with Facebook and Google and data privacy and these large hacks and all this stuff. I mean, do you see like the future of this kind of like, okay, it's okay to use the cloud, but it's got to be encrypted no matter what? I mean, do you see that? Do you see just these last couple of weeks of news as we're recording this? What's your personal reflection on that stuff?
Well, one thing that's really interesting is there was a case I'd written about where lawyers had shared Dropbox, but just via an unencrypted link, as long as you had access to the link, you could access you didn't need a password. And the lower court, I can't remember the exact court, but the lower court had said that was a waiver of, that when opposing counsel accidentally saw that link in an email that had been forwarded to them that should not have been.
Yeah.
It was part of an email chain. And then they went and accessed it. The court said, because it's not password protected, it's essentially open to the world. But then that was just overturned on appeal, saying that you had to have that very specific link. And so it may not have been password protected, but it was still protected in a way. So the court's just still kind of grappling with just that kind of issue where it isn't actually encrypted, but it's difficult to access because you need that very specific links. And all the news about all these different hacks, the hacks occur in so many different ways. Sometimes it's an employee taking the information. Other times it's someone guessing a password. Other times it's, really someone actually hacking into the system. You need to kind of understand how the hack occurred. And then there's Equifax, at that point, everything's already out there. I mean, in some ways, it's almost like a lost cause for the rest of us because
Sure.
our data's already out there. It sort of is what it is. And it's frustrating and it's concerning, but it's sort of part of the digital age, and it's going to be more regulations to address it. And unfortunately, I don't see a lot of that happening under the current administration. There's repealing regulations across the board, not just in the tech space. So I don't know.
Interesting. All I was going to point out before, Jake, was that my case offers secure encrypted messages to clients.
Oh, how? Oh,
isn't that? I just wanted to drop that plug in there. Make sure everybody knew. Staying ahead of the curve.
Slide that in there.
In talking about this, I wonder how many of these barriers people are putting in their heads without actually digging into it and saying, "Oh, wait, you know what? That was a regulation last year or 2 years ago, but it's not anymore." We could totally do that now. That's cool. That's very cool. We're talking about a kind of bigger concepts here of, security and encryption and stuff like that. But to get back to, someone who's listening right now, what would be like one useful tip on practice management that you could give the audience?
I've written about this quite a bit. I'm really interested in AI because that's sort of the next artificial intelligence, the next stage of where a lot of stuff is going to be happening. But in a lot of ways, AI is still a little bit forward thinking, and there's some practical applications for lawyers. But at the end of the day, AI is really about automation. And one thing I've been writing a little bit about, and I'm going to be speaking at the Illinois Futures Conference in May, is about ways to automate your firm where you don't actually need AI. There's a couple of different things that lawyers can do now to automate sort of the more tedious aspects of their practice. And some of these features are built into practice management software platforms like my case, but there's also standalone options as well. So there's a couple of different things lawyers can do. One of them is you can automate the whole billing, invoicing, and payment side of your practice. So, lawyers often spend 10 to 15 hours a month just getting the bills out so that they can get paid. And when you do it the old school way, where you're tracking your time on paper and going back and forth with your secretary to actually get that correct and then enter it into the system, and then you're having to draft a bill from all that data and then sending the bill out in paper format and waiting to get paid and then having to follow up in paper format if your clients don't pay. One way to automate all of that is if you use practice management or standalone options, so you can track your time in the software and in a mobile app. So you enter your time when you walk out of the courtroom. So that way you don't forget about it. You don't end up with that blank timesheet at the end of the day. You're entering your time as you go. And when you use practice management software, it's automatically associated with the case you're entering it for. So when you get back to the office and you want to send out a bill, it automatically will create an invoice of all the unbilled activity for that particular client. And you can review it, edit if it needs to be edited right there on the screen, click send, and it can get sent to your client with an option to pay it. Your client, there's a link where your client can pay that bill by credit card or debit card. And then, then they pay it that way rather than having to mail it out and wait for them to pay it by check or cash. You can automate that whole end of your practice. You can also automate tasks and to-dos because deadlines are the bane of a lawyer's existence, but they can make or break a case if you miss one. So when you automate the to-dos, one thing that my case has built into it that I know other practice management software has similar features. Ours is called Workflow. And that when you open up a PI case or a criminal defense matter, you've got the same deadlines for those cases in terms of when you have to serve reply papers, when you have to serve discovery demands, respond to discovery demands. And so when you open up a case, you just input all those deadlines right on top of the into your calendar. And so all those 30-day deadlines out from significant points are automatically put right on your calendar for that case. And so you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about missing any of your deadlines. And then you can also track your assistants and assign them as part of that workflow jobs that they need to do, paralegals or admin. And you can see when they get those done as well. So when you automate those types of things, it saves you a ton of time and energy, and it also takes some of the mental load. It takes it off your plate. So that's one thing. Another thing is there's a book that Sharon Nelson and John Simic, and there's a third author whose name escapes me, but they write a book for the ABA and they update it every year. It's Solo and Small Firm Legal Technology Guide, give or take. I may be missing a word, but they update that every year, and it goes from hardware to software and all the different considerations that lawyers want to think about. And they update all the information about all the different software products every year. And it's a really great guide. I just reviewed it on Above the Law. And it's a really handy guide. So that's a great place to go if you're looking to implement tech into your practice today.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've seen that resource. It's super, super cool. And that's why it's so nice that the Bar Association has all these resources. And I think my case has all these resources, all this practice management, all these time management, billing hours. We have all these resources. It's just kind of like getting people to realize that they should help themselves be better. I think we all kind of want to like get the pickle jar started ourselves. You know, I don't want a robot to open the pickle jar. I want to like struggle with it like a man, you know? So I think a lot of people think that they need to flagellate themselves in some way. How do you help? Have you ever helped like a new person's trying to sign up with My Case? They're not sure, you know, how do you help people unpack the idea like, hey man, you can't do this all yourself, you know, or most people that come to you are already absolved of that?
Well, I mean, that's sort of what my function is. When people sign up for a trial with My Case, we have account executives that help walk them through the process of, you know, trying the software out, learning about it, having one-on-one demos. But, you know, the sort of what my function is the outward facing, educating lawyers about the intersection of law and tech and how they can use tech and why technology matters. And so I write my biweekly column on Above the Law that focuses on that. I have a monthly column for the ABA Journal. I write a weekly column for the Daily Record that's syndicated nationally across Dolan Media's different publications in the different states. And then I write for the My Case blog. So I really do try to sort of serve that function of helping lawyers understand why it will help them and why they need it and why it'll simplify their lives and why it's worth it to sort of make the time investment to learn about tech and use it, and kind of why they have to, you know, why tech competence is important.
You write a lot. You have all those monthly appointments and you have like a journalist kind of approach to it. For lawyers who may want to get into blogging more, maybe they want to spread some of that knowledge. What are your tips for writing? Like, what's your process like?
You know, you have to really enjoy the subject you're writing about and have a passion for it. Otherwise, it's going to show, you know, and it's going to be, the product's going to be that you create is going to be boring and it's not going to engage the reader. So, I mean, that's the very first thing. You have to really enjoy what you're writing about and you have to enjoy the process of writing. So for lawyers out there that don't enjoy writing, there's got to be some other format that's going to work better for you. I mean, it shouldn't be painful, you know? So, I mean that, and then in terms of, you know, like for most lawyers, I would recommend that they, you know, if they're going to blog, have one blog post a week at least, give or take, to at least stay up to date on these things. But, you know, how to successfully blog, especially when the platforms are all changing, is really like a webinar or a CLE in and of itself.
Of course, yeah.
But in terms of my process, I mean, I tend to spend my mornings on social media because what I do is I have an RSS feed and I handle My Cases, social media accounts. I had my own personal accounts. And my LinkedIn account now has 165,000 followers because LinkedIn started featuring me a couple of years ago as someone to follow in law. So
nice.
You know, I have to maintain my own brand and accounts and also My Cases. But as part of that process of doing that, I spend my morning going through the feed, seeing what everyone else is saying, finding out what's trending, what's happening, what opinions were just handed down, what you know, what the latest news is that affects legal tech. And by doing that, I can not only share that information on social media, but I can also figure out what I'm going to write about for the different articles that I write, you know, on a regular basis. So I will go through that and sort through it and save it and, you know, bookmark it so that I know, you know, and identify which article I think I'm going to write about it, you know, whether it's Above the Law or the ABA Journal or the Daily Record. So that's, you know, my mornings are kind of spent doing that because you have to know what's being said and what's happening in order to sort of be current and write about this stuff. And so then in the afternoons, I have a lot of meetings because My Case is on the West Coast and I'm on the East Coast.
Oh man.
So there's often My Case meetings, but that's also when I do my writing, and I write about 600 to 1,000 words a day on average. So my afternoons are kind of spent with that, and on podcasts like this or phone calls, so I kind of have it piecemealed in two different ways. My mornings are really focused on knowledge gathering and handling social media, and then the afternoons are more focused on creating, writing, creating, and meetings.
And is that something that has it just kind of evolved that way, or are you like a strict calendar blocking type
I've always done that in the morning because that's just the way to start off the day. But I also think that I used to write more often in the mornings because I write better then. But as long as I can take a break after lunch and sort of reset my mind a little bit, if that makes sense, I can get back into the writing mode. And because they're on the West Coast, they don't wake up. Well, they don't get into the office until 11:30 my time. So the morning is it's often easier for me to get through all the social media then. And then the afternoons, because that's the time when we have an overlap in terms of our schedules. So it's part of it's just evolved a little bit because of the time difference. And part of it is just I had to portion my, you have to have the creative time at one point with the ways to break it up with shorter bits of things, whether it's meetings or calls or answering emails. And then the morning is more just diving into so what someone once called Twitter a river, like almost like diving into a river of social media.
Totally. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
With some bits of trash in there. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Interesting. So kind of transitioning back to the legal tech thing, and I'll use the diving into a river. I had the opportunity to go to the legal tech conference this year, kind of popped in, checked it out. I was very surprised at the size of it.
Is this Legal Week or legal ABA Tech Show or Legal Week is what they call it now? Legal Tech in New York?
The one in Chicago?
ABA Tech Show, yeah.
So it was really cool though. It was very, on the one hand, encouraging, and I kind of noticed I got kind of like a startup feel. Like it seems like there's a lot of things that are kind of in there, and I'm kind of curious. Like, do you see anything evolving that is exciting for you, and what do you think the future holds for legal tech?
Well, the stuff that I think is the most it's going to be the most impactful is the AI stuff. And there wasn't a ton of that at ABA Tech Show because ABA Tech Show is targeted more at solos and smalls. There was some AI companies, but not nearly as much as there was and discussion. But there was a lot more at Legal Week in New York City in the very beginning of the year. I think it was in late January. But AI has a ton of potential in the legal space, especially for the larger firms in terms of, and lawyers in general, legal research, contract analytics, and then data analytics. So those are the three categories that really stand out the most to me. It's really gonna, like, the contract analytics part is really interesting. I just wrote my ABA column on that last month. This idea of lawyers that deal with contracts on a regular basis. What the AI does is when you compare, you get the contract in, and if it's a covenant not to compete or an employment contract or something, it compares it to all of the different ones that it has in its system, and then it lets you know the outliers. This paragraph doesn't typically appear in these, or this paragraph typically appears, but it's missing from yours. And so it sort of shows you the outliers and helps you analyze your contracts a lot more quickly. And Law Geeks is one of the companies that does that. They're in Israel, but they had just released a study right around the time of legal tech. What they'd done is they'd had a bunch of lawyers look at documents, and then their software look at the contracts, and they had a panel of neutral judges or something to make sure that this was all done correctly, and that steps weren't skipped or anything. And it was something like, it took the lawyers maybe I can't remember, but it was something like 8 hours or something, or maybe 3. I don't even know. But and then it was like 43 seconds for the computers to analyze in the same time. It was something ridiculous. And the computers were 95% accurate, and the lawyers were 84%. And these were lawyers that were experienced in these matters. And so it just showed how the software really saved a ton of time and increased accuracy. And so I think you're going to find that in contract analytics. And then there's some great things being done in legal research. The one that interests me the most right now is I'd written about this last year. Fleming Thomson Reuters is doing in Westlaw. And I write a Thomson Reuters book, just by full disclosure. I'm technically a contract employee of theirs, but both they and Lexis are doing really interesting things. But the thing that Thomson Reuters was doing with Westlaw that really stood out to me was when you're doing research and you save a bunch of cases to a folder, it will look at those cases and find the commonalities between those cases and start serving you up content on the side in terms of briefs and cases and secondary, resources like treatises, just focused on those common issues found in those cases. So it's different than you entering this Boolean search or just a regular search, and it looks for keywords that appear over and over again in these documents, and it actually identifies the commonalities between the documents you've saved. And so it can, by doing that, identify a sort of a specific topic that you're looking at and serve up relevant data. And I thought that was a really interesting way of doing that and providing you some additional research. So And Lexis is also doing Lexis has made a number of really interesting AI acquisitions, Ravel Law and Lex Machina. And so they're doing a ton of really interesting things. And it seems like those are actually acquisitions where they're going to actually use rather than just bury them, it seems like they want to use what they have and come up with some cool stuff. So I think you're going to see a ton of really cool stuff in the AI. And Bloomberg Law is doing a ton of stuff too. I wrote about that as well, but there's a ton of really interesting things. And I think you're going to see in the next 2 years, because it's a culmination of all the tech that's needed to make AI work. It's all sort of coming to fruition and working together really well right now. And it's a matter of taking the tech and applying it in the right ways and then convincing lawyers that it's going to make a difference for them. So there's some hurdles, but I think you're going to see some really interesting stuff with AI. And I think it's super exciting.
I like the idea of AI, particularly with discovery. That seems like a really, really cool thing. But I've heard it mentioned, like, and I'm curious to what you think about that. Are we going down a slippery slope that we're making contracts or terms of service or something like that are so complicated that they need an AI to go through it? Do you know what I mean? Like, are we going to get to a point now where people aren't even going to be able to read it?
Well, I mean,
I know I'm being a little absurd,
No,
but
it's
I'm
a
saying,
great.
like,
My follow-up question is if I can do it in 43 seconds, then where's my billable hour as a lawyer? Why would I hire something that can do something in 43 seconds?
well, because what that does is it's the initial legwork. It makes it so that lawyers can start moving towards flat fee billing and value billing, so that instead of and they're being forced to do that now, because when legal departments in companies go to outside counsel, they're starting to scrutinize the bills a lot more. They're starting to require more efficiency. And same with legal, large companies that just hire law firms as well. I mean, they're all requiring a lot more efficiency. And so this provides that efficiency, but at the same time, what it does is just gives you a first glance at that contract. Then you really need, and it just tells you what's typically in there, but then you need to tailor it to your specific client and your client's needs. So there's additional work that needs to be done in analysis, and that's where the lawyers come in. And they also come into the creation of the software, because you need lawyers to advise the programmers, the software programmers, on what's supposed to actually be there. And you also are going to need lawyers, just like you need people to run the machines. And there's all these other jobs that are being created in legal tech for lawyers as well. So, I mean, it's may cut down on, it's cut down on some of the associates in terms of the doc review, but it was really drudgery to begin with. And everything's just kind of shifting. And it's not going to get rid of the lawyers. It's not going to get rid of the doctors. It's not going to get rid of all these other professions, but it's going to change them. And change can be hard sometimes, but it can also be good.
That's really amazing. So you don't think that they're going to get to a point? I mean, who knows if AI is going to get to a point that it's so complicated? I mean, Paul's question is really, really valid. If it's involved in the creation, then could it create something that we wouldn't know how to undo? I mean, of course, but as long as humans remain at that point of creation and helping it monitor it and kind of, do making sure the code does its work.
Well, I mean, you definitely get to that whole, is it utopia or the apocalypse? Like, what's going to happen, or dystopia? What's going to happen with AI and Terminator and Battlestar Galactica? And, but I mean, I'm more concerned about the machines taking over the world and taking over the, creating contracts. Like, I think if we get to that point where the machines are, have reached sentience and are starting to I think they're going to be less concerned with creating contracts than they are with getting rid of humans. So
right.
You can have other things to battle at that point.
Yeah, it'll be a whole nother podcast.
I'm not sure. I accepted these terms of service, and I think I work for my laptop now. It's confusing. That's what it's telling me.
Yeah, I'm just following it. So wrapping it up finally, Nicole, how can people learn more about you?
I blog at the MyCase blog. It's mycase.com/blog. I have a website, NicoleBlackESQ.com or lawtechtalk.com. That's where I list all of my speaking engagements and media mentions and articles. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm at Nikki Black, NIKIBLACK on Twitter. And I guess that's it.
Ten questions we ask everyone.
All righty, here we go. With the cleverly named 10 questions we ask everyone. Number 1, What was the last book you read?
I'm writing a post about, I didn't read the entire book, but I was just reading today about Justice Ginsburg, because I'm going to write a post about her tomorrow for Above the Law. And if so it's either that or the other book I'm reading is it's called, it has nothing to do with the law. It's a little embarrassing. It's let me find 1 second and I'll tell you what it's called. The Cool Factor. It's like I think it's called The Cool Factor. It's about fashion. Yeah, The Cool Factor is what it's called. And it's about fashion. So
I'm into it.
Justice Ginsburg.
Yeah, I'm going to check it out.
Totally.
Nice. Absolutely. Okay, number 2. What is your best habit?
I guess it's a productivity. I get things done when they need to get done. I don't procrastinate. I like to get everything marked off my to-do list almost as soon as it comes in.
Number 3, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, or none of the above?
Well, it depends on why you want to use the platform. So I can't answer that without additional information.
Number 4, coffee or tea?
I tend to drink soy green tea lattes. I've been drinking those for years and not drinking coffee, but I just recently started drinking coffee again, so both.
Okay. Number 5, what's your favorite place?
I would say it's my house. I spend a ton of time here since I work remotely for my case, and I like my house. My house.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I like my house.
Stalker.
I'm sure it's cool though.
Okay.
Number 6, is Keanu Reeves a good actor?
I think so. I love The Matrix. It's super feature facing, and I think he is. I don't know. I never had much of an opinion either way.
Yes.
Is he a bad actor? And I didn't know it.
Yeah, I know.
No.
Just
He's
right
an
in the
excellent
middle,
actor.
maybe.
He's supposed to be a really nice guy too.
Okay, number 7, what was your first job?
When I was 15, I taught tennis for Parks and Rec, and I got paid for that. So I'd say that, or babysitting before that. But I think teaching tennis at Parks and Rec was my first job.
Number 8, what is a skill you have outside of your current occupation that you incorporate into your work?
Kind of more my hobby, maybe. Although I haven't been doing it as much lately, but I make jewelry, and then I tend to give it away to like the Volunteer Legal Services Project auction every other year. Like I donate some for that, or to like other when the Young Lawyers Division had an auction for charity, I don't, so they have silent auctions, so I'll donate my jewelry locally towards silent auctions for different causes. I suppose I think that answers the question sort of.
How cool is that?
Awesome.
Yeah,
That's so cool.
Do you got an Etsy plug or anything you want to drop in here? Or?
Well, I have a website. It's legallyboho.com.
That's awesome.
But I haven't been making as much jewelry as I used to lately. I've slowed down a little bit, but I still have some for sale there.
Number 9, what sites, blogs, or newsletters do you regularly check in with?
Well, I have Feedly as my RSS feed, and I probably am subscribed to about 100 blogs that I go through their feeds every day. So it'd have to be more specific.
All of them. We'll just say all of them.
Okay.
Number 10, we made it to the end. After a long day or a long week at work or a long podcast interview, how do you relax and unwind?
I love to cook. And so at the end of most days, I will cook dinner. I watch science fiction shows on my computer while I'm cooking. Right now I'm working through Andromeda. And I love wine, so I'll drink my wine while I cook and watch my science fiction. So it's kind of well, it sounds like a little bit geeky, but I guess that fits with what I do.
It sounds great.
It sounds amazing.
Sounds great. All right. Well, you have made it to the end. Thank you for being a good sport and answering 10 questions we ask everyone.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
For show notes, links, and info, go to www.consultwebs.com/lawsomepodcast. Be sure to leave us a review and rating in iTunes or wherever you find the you listen to. Until next week, stay lawsome.